When it comes to the NFL draft, everybody is looking for the best value they can get. What type of value you're looking for, however, that's where the rubber meets the road. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I am your host, David Harrison, here with you every Monday through Friday. Your friend, your eyes, your ears on the ground, covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. Also for WUSA9.com, your local DC CBS affiliate. I want to thank you for coming through today and for today's episode, in which we're going to discuss the new look offensive line. Now that we have a little bit of information about what the intent is there, how the locker room dynamics are going to play out, Washington standing up for scouts everywhere. And we're going to kick it all off by talking about best value opportunities at number 29 for the Washington Commanders in this year's NFL draft. Everydayers, those of you who come through for every single episode, a special thank you to you for being so great and so awesome. For anybody out there, if you're not already subscribed for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this episode, please do so right now. And if you're new to the show, I want to thank you for finding the show, especially during the off season. Hopefully you like what you hear or see and you stick around for even more. Come back, maybe become an everydayer. Locked On Commanders is a daily podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. It's Wednesday, and that means it's mailbag time, and insiders did not disappoint. We've got way more questions than we can possibly answer in one episode, so we're going to get as many as we can into this episode. Once again, we'll probably look at doing another mailbag episode. I'm going to try to maybe make it a 2-per-week mailbag episode pattern until we get to the NFL draft, because a lot of these questions have to do with the NFL draft, and I want to try to get as many of your questions, as many of your angles addressed as I possibly can. But we're going to kick this one off with Greg, who came through and said the saying is you want to draft a starter with your first-round pick. I agree. But at number 29, I can argue that there won't be a player available that will definitely be a day one starter outside of maybe a running back. What should be the number one priority for your first pick? Is it what the player can provide as a rookie or what they believe the player projects to be in years 2 and beyond? Are traits going to be more important than production when drafting what will likely be a backup/role player as a rookie? And this is a great question. It strikes every football nerd, roster building nerd part of me. So I was super excited to see this question. So Greg, I greatly appreciate it. I think the best problem that a team can have when you enter the month of April is to have it difficult to find a starter in the first round, but you want to make sure it's for the right reasons, right? So for the Washington Commanders, it's not that they don't have holes, right? So the right reasons would be we're just flush with talent everywhere. We don't need anything. We're solid. That's the ultimate dream. No team, I don't say no team, but mostly no team is ever really there. The closest I ever got was actually the Super Bowl winning Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster. That next season, they brought back all their starters, most of their role players. So you looked at that roster and you're like, guys, like if you stay healthy, you really have a great chance to run this thing back. And they did have a great chance to run it back, even though they actually didn't. That's the closest I ever got to a team where I looked at it and said, bro, in the first round, you're drafting backups. You know what I mean? So that is the ultimate dream. So the Commanders have holes, right? They certainly have positions of need. They've got spots they need to fill. But the reason you kind of look at the Commanders number 29 and say they may be drafting a backup here is because of the projections of who might be available to maybe fill a spot that's, you know, not necessarily being filled with a blue chip player or a great player, like you said. So one of those needs is not necessarily going to get met by a great player. Now, prioritizing for a team in this stage, that also has to do with it. What stage of the team building process are you in? Are you still building your contender? Are you a contender, or are you a champion trying to stay a champion, which, you know, gets into different categories that we're not going to talk about yet because the Commanders aren't champions yet. When that day comes, we'll talk about those parts of it as well. But in this stage, this team is still retooling, right? That's the word that Adam Peters and head coach Dan Quinn used all last year. Is they're not rebuilding the Washington Commanders, they're retooling the Washington Commanders. So this team is still retooling. Now they've got some really good tools in place, right? Jaden Daniels, Mikey Sainristil, Terry McLaurin, Sam Cosmi when he's healthy. Bobby Wagner is a good tool right now, but we know he's a placeholder for hopefully maybe a year, maybe 2 more years, but he is a placeholder. Eventually there's going to need to be a younger guy filling those shoes. So you want to kind of go there, and you're still looking for players to build around for this team, I think. So no matter where you're picking, obviously at some points you're going to have types of players that start to fade. Like, you're not going to get to the 6th round and say, oh man, this is a cornerstone piece that we're going to build around. But as much as you can get a guy you can build around, you want to try to find those guys. And you can still find foundational players in top heavy classes like this one. So for me, if you can't get one surefire starter, you still want to find players you can potentially build around, even if that building around them is going to come in the future. So that would be this year, they would probably be role players, right? As you put it there, Greg. So because role players can provide you play as a rookie, but also have the potential to develop into starters and pieces that you could build around, the better they are out the chute, the more likely they are to be a starter at some point during the current season or even in the near future. So it's a little bit of both, right? But you have to gauge it. So looking at the context of this year's class, if a guy like, say, Trey Amos, cornerback out of Ole Miss, is viewed in the room, in the commander's room, as a guy who's likely better than any of the other outside corner options on the team right now, if you're looking to move Mikey Sanders still back inside, then he'd arguably provide you a lot as a rookie in volume, right? But not as an overall projection of him. If your evaluation of him in the room is his peak is going to be average cornerback in the NFL, then you're going to get a lot of snaps as a rookie. But is he really going to be a foundational player? That's the question. So are we spending day one capital just to have to fill that position back in 2 or 3 years' time? That's going to be part of the question. On the flip side of that, if I can move back from number 29, maybe I get JT Tuimoloau, the edge out of Ohio State, who projects as a pass rush specialist immediately as a rookie. But if his growth is surprising in his first year, kind of like Mikey Sanders still was, he might challenge for that starting end spot right away. But we know, we look at his potential and say, even if he doesn't challenge for that starting end spot in 2025, 2026, he should be coming into our offseason as the favorite to be that guy. Then maybe you can also add like a cornerback, Siobhan Revel Jr. out of East Carolina, who is coming off of an ACL injury. So his stock is going to take a little bit of a hit. He does have some mechanical issues that need to be cleaned up, but he's got good instincts. He plays aggressively. He may not be a guy that I project to take a starting job from somebody immediately, but when he's healthy and he gets good coaching and he develops, 2 years' time, 2026, maybe 2027, you might have a really solid cornerback that you spend a day 2 pick on, and you have a starting edge that now those guys are guys that you're helping to build your defense around, right? So that's a good swap for me if I'm taking 2 guys that I think do have the potential to be building block type players versus one who might be, but also might be a guy that I think I have to replace in 2 or 3 years. So if you're picking, there has to be, in my opinion, a plan for where that player is going to fit right now, year one, where he's going to fit in 3 years' time, and where he's going to be in 5 years' time. So if you're talking about a starting running back in the first round, to use Greg's analogy or example, you're talking either a Marion Hampton out of North Carolina, or you're talking about Travion Henderson out of Ohio State, right? You're not expecting Genty to be there. Like, that'd be a pretty amazing dip. And those are the 2 most popular guys I think most people have is late day 1 or early day 2 type of guys. So for both of those backs, honestly, I think as a rookie for the Washington Commanders, you're talking about a rotational back. 3 years later, you're looking at him being your number 1 back. 5 years later, I think both those guys have the potential to be all pro type of running backs. Now, if you're talking about Tuimoloau and Revel, then you're looking at rotational special teams players at rookies. You're looking at 3 years down, they're the every down starter. 5 years, I think you could logically look at them now and say, I can see a Pro Bowl path for both those guys. Now, Trey Amos, I think you're talking about a starting contender. So again, we're getting that immediate volume from him. 3 years later, you're looking at him being an established starter on your team. He's been here for a while. He knows the scheme, that type of dude. 5 years from now, I think you're probably peaking that Pro Bowl. I don't think anybody's looking at Trey Amos right now and saying, this dude's got all pro potential right out the gate, right? So that being said, if I'm looking at getting 2 Pro Bowl potential players 5 years down the road, 2 guys that could be every down starters 3 years down the road, but they're going to be rotational special teams players to start, at least in my expectation, versus 1 guy who is probably going to contend to start right away, but I still think he's got the same ceiling as those 2 other guys, then for me, the math says with where the Commanders are today, trade back, get the 2 guys that might be Pro Bowlers in 3 to 5 years versus getting the 1 guy who might be a Pro Bowler in 3 to 5 years. That's where I stand on it. Now, from a media standpoint, having spoken to multiple GMs and scouts over the years about this topic, that's where I stand. Where AP stands on it, I can't really tell you. That's something he keeps very close to the chest, which I respect him for. Of course, there isn't one way to do it either, right? Just because that's how I feel doesn't mean that's how you should feel or how Adam Peters should feel. And if Adam Peters were to say, nah, Dave, like, you got it wrong, here's how it goes, I'm not going to tell the man he's wrong, right? First of all, he's a sitting GM. I'm just a dude who's talked to other sitting GMs and formulated an opinion based off that, right? So if AP thinks that they need a dude who can just stand outside and not get killed immediately, and Trey Amos is that guy, then you take Amos over the two other guys. But the overall team potential is not going to be the big move there. So where you go as a team is important for me too. I think if you're a player away, right? So if you're not in the retooling, but you're a player away, I'd rather go trade for a guy. I'd rather go trade for a veteran where I've got NFL tape. I can see how NFL offenses attack him and how he does against that, especially when you're outside of the top 10, especially at a tough position transition, like, say, cornerback, which is what I've been talking about. Pass rushers, the production they had in college tends to translate more directly. Quarterbacks, you can see some of the traits that will translate. Running backs as well. Receivers are a little easier to evaluate. But corners, offensive linemen can be difficult. Cover safeties can be difficult. Those positions rely a lot on technical foundations and instincts. So I've always kind of held true to theory. Going back to the original part of the question, or the statement, I should say, you're always looking for a starter in the first round. I've always held true to the theory that picks 1 through 5 are starters as soon as you turn the card in. Picks 6 through 12 are starters projected on your team by the time we get to training camp. 13 to 25, you're expecting them to earn starting jobs by the end of training camp. And 26 on, you're just looking for the best combination of immediate availability and future projection. So that's where I stand on first round picks and honestly beyond that as well. So if you're in that 1 to 5 range and you're not looking at a dude on the board that's a starter as soon as you write his name on the card, I'm looking to trade out. Okay, so great question. Hopefully I answered it thoroughly enough without taking over the entire episode on it. Of course, if you need any more clarification, Greg, let me know and we'll talk about that. But the truth of the matter is the NFL draft is all projection, no matter how confident you want to be. We've got some opinions coming in on some rule changes and some clarification requests on what the Washington Commanders got implemented this week here in Palm Beach, Florida at the NFL Annual League Meetings. We'll get into that next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that today thanks to our friends over at Game Time. And what Game Time wants you to do is imagine watching your favorite team play live, feeling the energy of the crowd, witnessing the unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. I know myself, everybody else that was in Northwest Stadium when that Hail Mary was brought in by Noah Brown, never going to forget that. Even that Dallas Cowboys game, man, in Northwest Stadium when the Commanders are coming back and then the returns happened. Unfortunately, you also had the Austin Eckler concussion in there, but even the way that game ended, just excitement and all those things. That night in Cincinnati on Monday night where Jaden Daniels just kind of announced himself to the league and delivered that dime to Terry McLaurin. Those are the moments that Game Time wants you to get involved in. They also want you to get there and get those tickets without a whole lot of stress. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever for you to grab your last-minute seats with unbeatable prices. And what's really amazing is Game Time picks. They curate picks for you to make it easier for you to find the best value for your tickets to sports, concert, comedy, theater, and even more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Continuing on now, today's episode of Locked On Commanders, mailbag episode here midweek after following the NFL Annual League Meetings. The league meetings are done. I'm spending one more day in Florida with my family, just kind of enjoy that a little bit with them without having to work too much. We're going to continue here on mailbag episode from our insiders. Merle came through and said, "Hey, David, I see Washington got the rule change they wanted. Can you clarify what exactly it means? Because I'm a little confused about it." And yeah, I can definitely do that. If you missed any of the rule changes, you can go to WSA9.com. I've got an article posted there with all the rule changes that were approved, the bylaws, the resolutions, all those things. And as best I could, explaining as much of them as I can without making it an encyclopedia. So if you have any questions about them, do exactly what Merle did and come through and ask a question for a mailbag. So Merle asking about this. This was a resolution. This is not an on-the-field rule change that the Washington Commanders brought up and were able to get affected. But basically what the Commanders were able to help affect in the NFL is from now on, all NFL teams will have to permit other postseason clubs scouting credentials for 2 consecutive games, weeks 17 and 18, and also permit scouting credentials for wild card games to teams in the same conference also participating in the postseason. So how do I break that down? So you're the Washington Commanders, you're looking like a playoff team, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are also looking like a playoff team. So I know if I'm the Washington Commanders, I may have to go play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the wild card round. So what I want to do is I want to send scouts to those games in week 17 and 18 so I can scout the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? I haven't seen them in a while. I've got tape, sure, but there's nothing that beats eyes on scouting. So I'm going to have that opportunity now. Before, teams didn't necessarily have to do that. So I'm going to get that opportunity now. Also, let's say I'm playing the wild card round against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I know in the divisional round, I may play the Green Bay Packers, who were playing, because I was going to say Detroit Lions, but the Detroit Lions weren't playing in Wild Card Weekend. Now, if the Green Bay Packers are playing, and I know they may be my second round matchup, I can now send scouts to their wild card game to scout them ahead of time. So that's basically the change that the Washington Commanders got affected in their resolution that will take effect in the 2025 NFL season. And it's just going to help their scouts do a better and more thorough job of getting their job done so the Washington Commanders can be more prepared. So a good question there from Merle. Hopefully enough clarification there, Merle. If not, let me know and I will do my best to give you further clarification. Ravi came through. I don't like the overtime change. Both teams had 60 minutes to win. Why should they benefit from another possession if they can't do that? And yeah, Ravi, I know a lot of people agree with you, man. I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'll be truthful with you guys. I didn't really care one way or another how the overtime rule went. At the end of the day, however they deem it the most fair, however the current players, current coaches, current owners, all that stuff deem it most fair, I'm good with it. If they're good with it, I'm good with it. So playing devil's advocate is what I'm going to do. Both teams also have 4 quarters to win the game, right? So if both teams get 4 quarters to win the game, which of course they should, then it kind of makes sense that both teams should also get the at least equal beginning opportunity to win in overtime. So hockey has overtime, even matchup in overtime, shootouts when they need them. Soccer has a similar type of it can be sudden death, but like soccer is a little bit different. Like if one team possesses the ball in soccer and scores and they win, and I'm not even a full soccer fan, so if you're a soccer fan and I'm messing this whole thing up, I apologize. Baseball, extra innings, right? You're never going to have just one team come up to bat. Basketball, obviously, there's going to be more than one possession. Football really is the only major sport that I'm aware of that has a sudden death overtime format, right? So getting on board with not having that sudden death option, I don't have a problem with it just because that's kind of how most sports are. Now, some people, and Robbie may be one of those people, say, well, this is what separates football from the rest of those sports. I got you. Again, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm just going to play devil's advocate on why they may have gone about that. Robbie also said about the kickoff adjustment, if the league wanted to lower the amount of the touchbacks they see, then they should have just moved it to the kickoff spot. If there's a touchback, you get the ball at the spot of the kickoff. That'll stop touchbacks. That will 100% stop touchbacks. You're 100% right. But I don't think the league necessarily wants to do that, right? So I think what the league wants to do is they want to give teams incentives to put the ball in play. But they don't want to take away their ability to make that strategic decision for themselves, right? So I think there's a line there where it's like, look, we want to make it punitive enough to where you decide on your own to put the ball in play. We don't want to make it so punitive that you don't have a choice, if that makes sense. They want to protect that free will. I think the furthest the league would ever go would maybe be the 40, then the minus 40. So the receiving team would receive the ball at their own 40-yard line, but I don't think you'd go any further than the 40-yard line. So I think the 35-yard line, again, it's gonna take something pretty drastic for the league to even get off the 35. But I don't think you'd ever see them go past the 40-yard line, because then you're like I said, you're forcing the teams then to not make the decision on their own, but you're basically just telling them you're going to put the ball in play. So good questions about the rule changes. We got a couple other questions about some changes happening with the roster, starting off with how the new look offensive line might look now that we got a little bit of clarification from the Washington Commanders here at the league meeting in Palm Beach, Florida. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, mailbag episode here as we get through the middle part of the week. And Seth came through. We got some clarity on what the offensive line will look like next season. It seems like Brandon Coleman and Andrew Wiley are going to compete at right tackle. My question is, given this new information, what would be your ideal offensive line week 1 without Sam Cosmi? So if Sam Cosmi cannot return by week 1, which would be amazing if he did, usually ACL tears, you're talking 10 to 12 months. 10 to 12 months puts Sam Cosmi right about November at the earliest, right? So like Halloween would be early. That being said, never say never with people. I would never count Sam out if he's wanting to get back earlier than that and he's got the right people around him to do it. I would never count him out. I'll tell you that right now. But preparing, like you said, for Sam Cosmi out week 1, that's the expectation. My ideal offensive line, honestly, does not change with the information that we got here. It's pretty much been how I've been kind of operating. Left tackle, Laremy Tunsil. Left guard, Nick Allegretti. Center, Tyler Biadasz. Right guard, Andrew Wiley. Right tackle, Brandon Coleman. And this is as the roster is as of right now, right? Like Seth acknowledged in our text back and forth, like, yeah, the team might draft a guy in the first 3 rounds or something, and obviously that's going to put something into the mix. But as the roster stands right now, that's where I look at it. I would not be completely surprised to see Nick Allegretti get a little bit of competition from one of the new free agents. You know what I mean? But as it stands right now, that's the starting 5 I would go with. And the reason I've got Andrew Wiley in at right guard instead of Brandon Coleman is because, for one, Andrew Wiley isn't your long-term right tackle, right? He's long in the tooth. He's getting older. He's just not going to be your long-term right tackle. Brandon Coleman could be your long-term right tackle for a decade plus. 2, if you have a young right tackle that gives up a quick pressure, right? You just beat off the line of scrimmage. It's not good, of course. But a right-handed quarterback like Jaden Daniels is going to see that. He's going to have more time to react. Even if Brandon Coleman gets beat on the inside as a right tackle, Jaden Daniels still going to have more time to react to it versus a young right guard getting beat immediately off the line of scrimmage. Now that defensive player is coming right up the gut at the quarterback, right? So you'd rather have that type of a mixture. So because of those reasons, that's basically why I would go Brandon Coleman at right tackle over Andrew Wiley. Andrew Wiley, I know he's got guard experience. I actually spoke to him at one point last year about the potential move inside. And, he gave the answer you'd expect Andrew Wiley to give, which is whatever the team needs me to do, I'm going to do. If Cliff Kingsbury told him to go line up as an X receiver and run a post, Andrew Wiley's going to go do it the best way he possibly can, because that's who Andrew Wiley is, right? So that's the answer for that one. Rod came through, our last one here for today's mailbag episode. One of the things that made the Commanders such a special team last year was the brotherhood they shared from top to bottom. Do you see anything or anyone at this point that may threaten that X factor? And I'll tell you simply, I don't. I'll get into the weeds of it because I know the biggest questions are Deebo Samuel. Laremy Tunsil had a few insiders actually ask about Javon Kinlaw. I think most people ask about Javon Kinlaw. They're kind of coming from maybe more of a media interaction than anything else, and I wouldn't worry about that too much. As far as Deebo goes, AP knows him, right? At the end of the day, Adam Peters knows Deebo Samuel, and Adam Peters knows the kind of player, the kind of man he wants in the locker room. So if Adam Peters says Deebo Samuel is that dude, until I have a reason, until I see it with my own eyes, or I hear from another player, I'm not going to sit here and question it, to be honest with you. Laremy Tunsil. So people talk about these things with Laremy Tunsil. He doesn't take self-accountability. He doesn't do all these things. Whatever. We talked about this. The Locked On Texans guys will tell you that they've had experiences with Laremy Tunsil. He takes plenty of accountability behind closed doors. He takes plenty of accountability in the meeting room. He takes plenty of accountability in side conversations with the media or to his teammates. He just doesn't do it. He doesn't go on ESPN. He's not going to go to Scott Van Pelt and say, yeah, Scott, man, my false start on that 3rd and 5 was really detrimental and I lost our team the game. That's just not who he is, and that's not who he's going to be. He's more worried about his teammates' understanding. And I'll tell you right now, his teammates don't care if he's on ESPN doing it either. Like that's a general statement, right? Just talking to NFL players over the years. They don't really care what's happening on SportsCenter. They don't really care what's happening on, whatever. If it's their interview, they care about what they say, but they don't need Laremy Tunsil, right? Like the Houston Texans left guard doesn't need Laremy Tunsil to go out there and say, that wasn't his fault, that was my fault, to Scott Van Pelt to make him feel better. Also, the other side of this is like the Houston Texans don't benefit from selling the Washington Commanders a lemon, right? Like if Laremy Tunsil is this toxic locker room presence and D'Amico Ryan's out here saying all these good things about him, and their GM is out here saying all these good things about him, and it's ha 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 behind the scenes. We got draft picks from the Washington Commanders and we sold them this a-hole who's going to tear apart their locker room and all that stuff. They don't benefit from that. Like, yeah, like if you did that once, you get those draft picks. Okay, congrats. But the thing about it is you have to remember when it comes to the trade market in the NFL, there's only 31 other stores. So as soon as you do that to somebody, you've closed down that store to you forever. That store is never going to close or open again. So now you're down to 30. And by the way, Adam Peters, yeah, he's boys with John Lynch. So the San Francisco 49ers store, that store is closed. John Lynch, he's really tight from this guy in New England from when he played over there. So that New England store, they're closed. That New England guy, yeah, their staff is built up of guys who came from Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Dallas, and Philadelphia. So guess what? They're all closed now too. Like, you can't do that in this business. That's not, you know what I mean? I understand competition and all that stuff. And sometimes that's how it likes to get spun. Like, oh, Howie Roseman, screwed over this team in this trade and fleeced them and do all that. And that's how we do it, right? We grade these trades and we talk about who fleeced who and who won this and who won that and all that stuff. But like, these trade conversations happen, first of all, over a long period of time. So it's not like a quick, pull the rug out from under you, I got you type of deal. 2, They're very professional type conversations. They're not, don't watch Draft Day with Kevin Costner and think that's the way these conversations go. It's much more civilized and gentlemanly, I would say, than that. Like, don't get me wrong, each side is going to come away from a trade feeling like they got the better of the deal, but both sides are usually looking for something different. You don't usually have two teams, like you don't have two teams on the table say like, man, I could really use a veteran left tackle. You've got one, I don't have one. You want to keep one. Let me, you know what I mean? Like you both want something from these deals. So, and remember, Laremy, Tunsil, and Deebo Samuel, they're not coming here to save the day either, right? They're not being told they're coming here to save the day. They're not being covered by the media, at least not anybody that I'm seeing, especially locally, that they're coming to save the day. And they're not acting like they're here to save the day. And the locker room they're joining damn well knows those two guys are not here to save the day. What those two guys are here to do is to help make an already good team. That's what, like Deebo said that specifically. This team already knows how to win. I'm just here to bring my version of dog mentality to an already winning formula. It's the team that matters, right, at the end of the day. So I've had this conversation with other fan bases in the past when guys like Antonio Brown joined a roster, right? To think that if you're worried about one or even two guys coming in and just destroying the chemistry in a locker room, you're not giving a lot of credit to the other guys that are in the building, right? You're not giving a lot of credit to Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Zach Ertz, Sam Cosmi, Tyler Biotish, Bobby Wagner, right? You're not giving a lot of faith to those guys if you think this one or two personality is going to come in and just ruin everything. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing, Rod. Like I understand the concern and the question. Okay, don't get me wrong. But if you're a person who's want to walk around and say definitively, like you just know Deebo Samuel's going to wreck the chemistry on that offense, you're not giving the rest of that offense a lot of credit. And I'll tell you this, if Deebo Samuel were to come in and wreck the chemistry on that offense, then I would have to sit here and say maybe I gave them too much credit, right, for that. But I promise you, just haven't been around those guys for as much as I was last year and talking to guys around the team this year, even during the offseason. I'm not worried about it. And I don't think you should be either if you are out there as a Commanders fan. But great question, Rod. I think it's a really good question to address. So I'm glad you brought it up. And I'm glad everybody that sat through this whole thing got through it with me. This is our last episode in Florida. Next time we talk, I'll actually be in North Carolina on my way home. But anyway, hopefully you come through for that as well. In our next episode of Locked On Commanders, maybe another mailbag. I do have a Chick Hernandez interview that I've got taped from earlier in the week here that I need to get out to you. So it may be that. I don't know. I'll figure that out as my day develops continuously. So thank you for coming through here. If you have questions or you want to submit questions for future mailbag episodes, all you got to do is become a Locked On Commanders insider. Do that by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders, and you will get text messages from me throughout the weeks, throughout the days, throughout the months. Unfortunately, not as much this week because I was sick. But when I'm not sick, you'll get all that good information as you usually do. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez as they get you ready for everything coming up at the end of this very month. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through every single day. If you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.